In Ajigunal's flooded streets, 24-year-old Kambili sold roasted corn under a patchy umbrella, the smoke rising into the humid night. A sleek black SUV sped past, drenching her stall in filthy water. She shouted after it, then froze as it stopped. Out stepped a tall man in an expensive coat, his presence as sharp as the lightning overhead. Francis Jude, the textile tycoon whose name was whispered with both envy and fear. His gaze swept over her soaked frame. "You're shaking," he observed, voice deep. "I'll survive," she shot back. He reached into his pocket, handing her a card. "If you want work that pays more than coins in the dirt, call me." She slipped it into her apron without meaning to use it. But 3 days later, a crisis would force her to his marble gates, card in hand, ready to bargain with a man she barely knew for something she could never repay. Her younger brother had been arrested for stealing medicine for their sick mother. Bail was a mountain she couldn't climb. That's how Kambili found herself staring up at Francis Jude's mansion, rainwater dripping from her hair. Inside, the air smelled of polished wood and restraint. Francis listened silently as she spoke, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned back in his chair. "I'll pay your brother's bail and your mother's treatment. In return, you'll work for me, personally." Her brows knitted. "Why me?" He sipped his whiskey slowly. "Because you don't look at me like I'm a vault you're trying to crack. I need someone who owes me nothing, and isn't afraid to tell me the truth." It wasn't gratitude that made her agree. It was the quiet, unshakable sense that this man was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with money. Her job was far from glamorous. She managed Francis's private library, catalogued personal correspondence, and prepared tea at precise times. Yet, she sensed currents beneath the surface. Locked rooms, hushed phone calls in languages she didn't recognize, visitors who left pale and unsettled. At night, she often caught him standing alone in the garden, lit only by the faint glow of the city skyline. There was something wounded in the way he stared at the lights. One evening, she found him crouched over a stray dog, carefully wrapping its injured paw. "You're not what they say you are," she murmured without thinking. His lips twitched, half a smirk, half something softer. "That's because they only see the part one let them." Kambili walked away, unsettled by the realization that beneath the billionaire's armor was a man she might one day understand, or regret knowing at all. The headlines exploded one morning. Francis Jude under investigation for factory fire that killed 12 workers. Kambili's heart stilled. 10 years ago, her own father had died in a similar fire, at one of Francis's factories. She confronted him in his study, her voice trembling. "Was it you?" His gaze didn't waver. "It was my father's negligence. I took the blame to shield my mother from public disgrace. The truth would have destroyed her." Her hands shook as she processed it. "So you carried a lie that ruined families like mine." His jaw tightened. "I thought I was protecting what I had left." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. She turned away, realizing that falling for him would mean loving the man tied to her greatest loss, and there was no undoing that truth. Francis insisted she accompany him to a high society auction. He chose her dress himself, an elegant sapphire gown from his late mother's collection. The hall glittered with wealth, but it was Mrs. Ajiro, a board member with ice in her eyes, who left the deepest mark. She looked Kambili over slowly, a smirk curling her lips. "So, this is your latest charity project," she said, voice dripping condescension. Kambili met her gaze steadily. "Not charity. Choice." Later in the limousine, Francis's voice was low. "They're vultures, Kambili. You didn't flinch once." It hit her then. He wasn't parading her around to humiliate her. He was watching, testing, and maybe leaning on her courage in ways she hadn't seen coming. A rival businessman cornered Kambili outside the auction hall, his cologne cloying. He promised her enough money to send her family abroad, if she gave him access to Francis's confidential files. That night, she found those very files lying open on Francis's desk, as though he'd left them there deliberately. She didn't take them. The next morning, she confronted him. "Did you set me up?" He didn't look up from his coffee. "I had to know if you'd sell me out. Everyone does, eventually." Her chest tightened. "Then you never trusted me at all." His silence said more than words, but the shadow in his eyes told her that for a man like Francis Jude, trust was a currency rarer than gold. The investigation deepened like a slow-moving storm. One by one, Francis's business partners distanced themselves. Contracts were withdrawn. Counts were frozen. His name was dragged across every news channel, each headline slicing deeper than the last. Outside his gates, cameras flashed day and night, hungry for the image of a fallen king. Inside, the mansion grew quieter. First, the household staff resigned, claiming family emergencies. Then his driver quit without notice. Only the walls seemed loyal, holding the echoes of footsteps that no longer passed. Cambili's family begged her to come home. "He's drowning and he'll take you with him," her brother warned. But she stayed. She cooked his meals when the chef left. She took phone calls from lawyers when his voice was too hoarse to answer. She sat beside him through meetings that stretched into the small hours, watching the weight of the world press into his shoulders. One rain-soaked night, she found him in the study, staring at the fire like it might speak to him. His voice was low, almost broken. "You're the first person who stayed without expecting payment." She swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's because you can't buy warmth, Francis. You have to earn it." He looked up then, eyes shadowed but searching, as though trying to memorize her face before it too disappeared into the cold. Months passed before the truth broke free. Investigators uncovered the real story. His late father's negligence, the cover-ups, the falsified documents. Francis's name was cleared, but the victory tasted bittersweet. He had fought for his reputation, but in the process, he had seen the kind of world he'd been protecting all these years. When the court ruling came, the press expected him to return to his empire with triumph. Instead, he sold a portion of his assets and redirected the funds into rebuilding the community his family had once harmed. He personally oversaw the opening of a new factory, one with fair wages, safety measures, and a plaque honoring the 12 lives lost. On the opening day, Cambili stood beside him. The air buzzed with cameras, but Francis didn't look at them. His gaze stayed on her. "You could have gone back to the life you had," she said softly, half smiling. "Why would I, when you've given me a new one?" His voice was steady now, no longer carrying the weight of hiding. For the first time, she let him take her hand in public. The world saw them, but she didn't care. His fingers tightened around hers, not in possession but in promise. They weren't the poor girl and the rich man anymore. They were two souls who had walked through fire together and discovered that the rarest treasures in life couldn't be bought or inherited. They had to be fought for and shared. 3 months after the factory's grand opening, life had begun to settle into something neither of them had expected. Quiet, almost domestic. Cambili handled parts of the factory's community outreach while Francis took fewer business trips, preferring to work from his study overlooking the garden. For the first time, his world felt less like a fortress and more like a home. But peace is a fragile thing. One humid afternoon, a letter arrived without a return address. The handwriting was sharp, deliberate. "You may have buried your father's sins, but not all debts are paid." Francis read it twice, jaw tightening, then slid it into his desk drawer. Cambili had seen enough in his eyes to know this was not just an empty threat. That night, over dinner, she asked him what it meant. He hesitated, then finally spoke. "There are people who think I took more from them than I can ever return. And some of them aren't the forgiving kind." Her chest tightened. "Then we face them. Together." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "You don't know what you're promising, Cambili." She met his gaze steadily. "I do." Somewhere in the city, someone else was preparing to test that promise. And this time, the fire they'd have to walk through might burn hotter than the last. The letter had been easy to dismiss as a threat, until the first incident happened. Kambili was walking back from the community center one evening when a motorbike sped past, so close it nearly knocked her into the gutter. She barely regained her balance when she noticed a small folded note fluttering to the ground. It was addressed to her. "Stay out of his shadow, or you'll be swallowed by it." Her hands trembled as she told Francis. He went still, the muscle in his jaw tightening the way it did when he was thinking too quickly and too darkly. "This isn't random," he said finally. "They know exactly where to find you." That night, he insisted she stay in the mansion until he could handle things. But for the first time, Kambili felt the weight of his world pressing in, not just through headlines and rumors, but in the sharp edges of danger that could reach her anywhere. Lying in bed, she wondered if loving him meant learning to live in constant shadow. And Francis, in his study downstairs, was wondering something far worse, if keeping her safe meant letting her go. The mansion had always felt untouchable to Kambili, like a world walled off from chaos. But 2 nights after the note, someone proved otherwise. It started with a faint hum, then in the dead of night the garden lights went out. Kambili woke to the sound of shattering glass downstairs. Francis was already on his feet, a gun in hand. His movements calm but urgent. He told her to lock the bedroom door and not open it for anyone but him. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound of heavy footsteps faded. When Francis returned, his shirt was damp from the rain. His jaw set in stone. "They didn't take anything," he said. "They just wanted to send a message." She touched his arm, feeling the tension rippling beneath his skin. "Francis, whoever they are, they won't stop." He looked at her, and for a fleeting moment, the unshakable man everyone feared seemed almost human, afraid not for himself but for her. "That's why," he murmured. "I need to end this before they end us." Kambili didn't know if he meant a fight in the courts, the streets, or somewhere far darker.